cut it before the chorus. I just got put on the spot and asked what song I want to play, and I've always wanted to do that, but how embarrassing. G'day everyone, it's great to be here. There's a good vibe in the room. You must all be recovering product marketers. Thank you to Andrew and Beth for having me. I want to get started with a question for you all. Put your hand up if you enjoy, and I mean really enjoy, paying for things. You love handing over your hard-earned money when you buy something, right? Of course you don't. Now, I'm sure there are things that you are happy to pay for because you value them so much, but there are many things that we don't enjoy paying for but still need to buy. I'll happily pay 12 to 15 bucks for a pint of craft beer all night long, but I'll hesitate when my 4-year-old daughter puts in blueberries in the shopping basket and I have to pay 8 bucks for those, right? We're all human, we're all different, and what I value is likely different to a lot of things that you all value. So whether it's consumer goods or software, pricing is just plain hard. And that's why one does not simply perfect pricing. I had to get one meme in the presentation, so that's that out of the way. I'm not a pricing expert to set expectations. I'm just fortunate to have had a lot of experience working on pricing at some companies that you might have heard of. So I first joined Atlassian back in 2008, actually, when clouds were still fluffy white things in the sky. There was no concept of the cloud. Software was all still on-premise, and Atlassian was really starting to pioneer this product-led growth movement. Atlassian moved me to San Francisco. It's funny, Windows doesn't do flag emoji, so that's the Australian flag and the US flag there. They moved me to San Francisco, and 5.5 years later, I joined my first SaaS company in Intercom. And after 5.5 years of crazy growth at Intercom, I joined Loom and moved back to Australia right before the world ended. It was great timing. And after 1.5 years of the most explosive growth I'd ever seen working in SaaS, I took some time off. I spent some time with my family and my kids, and then I did a bit of consulting and became a Boomerang employee when I rejoined Atlassian. So out of curiosity, how many of you use a product or service from one of these companies? All right, we did a pretty good job. Put your hand back up if you love paying for them. Right. See, I told you, pricing is really hard. At each of these companies, though, I've worked on many different pricing projects in varying capacities. And so I've got a lot of lessons learned. And to give you a little bit more color, in 2008, Atlassian had roughly 100 employees, and from memory, it was doing about $20 million in revenue. Both of those had 10x'd by the time I left in 2014. And in those 6 years, Atlassian just had one pricing model. Something they've done really well over the years is keep their pricing really, really simple. But they did have many, many pricing increases over the years as the market changed. So I got really good at learning how to effectively communicate change with each and every increase and how to grandfather your customers. In contrast, Intercom was about half the size when I joined and had just hit $1 million in annual recurring revenue as a SaaS company. By the time I left, we were well over 100 million. During that time, I worked on at least 4 pricing models that I can remember. And again, I learned a lot about how to communicate change effectively, but learned more about how to test and iterate pricing in rapidly changing market landscapes. And lastly, Loom, which exploded in popularity in 2020, largely part to the forced shift of businesses needing to adapt to a new world of remote and distributed work, which became the norm and is now no longer the exception. And pricing played a huge role in Loom's revenue growth during this period. Its pricing model changed completely from being based on a single-player product to a multiplayer product. And we also made some changes with that I'll speak about a little bit later. And I'm really thankful for the experiences that I had at all these companies. So in the slim chance that Scott or Mike or Joe and Vinay or Owen and Des are watching, thank you very much. Before we move on, though, a couple of spoilers. Everything I'm about to say is completely my own opinion, so your mileage may vary. When it comes to pricing, there are no silver bullets. There are just many things that you can and should probably test. Your pricing is never going to be perfect. So be ready to make trade-offs, whether that's knowingly leaving money on the table or being comfortable with a lower volume of customers who pay you more. Lastly, Customers typically don't like change, but you have to make changes to pricing in order to optimize it. So as much as I love to be right, which my wife can attest to, I don't have all the answers. I just have a lot of learnings based on making some good pricing decisions and some not so good decisions over the last 14 years. With that, I'm going to cover a little bit about how I think about pricing and packaging after leading projects at Intercom, Loom, and Atlassian. To start, one thing I think super important with any projects, especially pricing and related ones, is to align on key terms and definitions so that we're all speaking the same language. So, pricing and packaging. Two words, two sides of the same coin. What do they each mean? For me, pricing refers to the methods that you employ to monetize the value that your product or service is delivering. Put simply, it's how and how much customers pay for your product or service. On the other hand, packaging is how and what customers actually buy from you. So it's more about how do you split up your product or service into tangible things that customers can purchase. So here's a real-world example to illustrate. Consumer goods, many products all on a shelf. Now, don't get me wrong, branding plays a huge role with consumer goods to a bigger degree than it does in software. But essentially what we're looking at here is a bunch of different product categories all grouped together from different suppliers, and they all look a little different, so their packaging is different, and they're all priced a little differently. I don't know about you, but I'm a sucker for good packaging when it comes to buying groceries, and I'll buy the best looking almond milk on the shelf, but I'll buy the cheapest regular milk, right? Now, software. Let's take a look at a software example. These are actually now made by the same company, or soon will be, but they're actually competing offerings, which led to a whopper of an acquisition, so well done to the team at Figma. It's a brilliant product, brand, and company. What's interesting to me, though, is how differently both of these competing offerings are priced and packaged. Each is catering to how their products have been built differently and brought to market differently over the years, and as well as the underlying strategies behind each of them. And I want to emphasize the word strategy here because if you treat pricing and packaging as a strategy in and of itself, it can create step changes in growth for your company. And I know this because I've seen it multiple times now over my career, and I'm going to give you 3 examples. Back in 2009, during the GFC, which some of you may remember, it's the global financial crisis, Atlassian introduced starter licenses, something that had never really been seen in the B2B software world at the time. SaaS was really still in its infancy, and there was no concept of freemium at all. Starter licenses provided a ton of value for a one-time cost. You could buy any Atlassian product for just $10 for 10 users forever. And this program, or this strategy, led to a huge step change in Atlassian's growth and market penetration at the time. Example number 2 is Intercom. Intercom evolved from selling a single product with a set of tiers, also known as plans, to re-architecting not just the product, but also how we took the product to market and how we priced and packaged it to sell it as a series of packages that were each designed based on the different jobs to be done that we had learned through research customers were hiring Intercom for. This change was a huge contributor to revenue growth over the next 3 years, helping us go from 1 to 5 million, 5 to 20, and 20 to 60 throughout 2014 to 2017. And lastly, at Loom, when we transitioned to becoming a multiplayer product, we introduced a key usage limit on the free plan. So you could have up to 25 creators on the free plan, but those creators were limited to recording Looms of up to 5 minutes in length. And prior to this, there was no limit at all. And so this one change had a dramatic impact on revenue growth without really negatively affecting usage, which was great. So it proved to be a great tipping point for free users and captured a lot of previously untapped willingness to pay. So as you can see, there are many approaches to pricing and packaging your product or service. And I'm not going to go into depth into each of those now. So I highly recommend checking out this post by Anthony Pieri on LinkedIn. I came across it a couple of months ago. It's a really fantastic summary of some of the most common pricing models in B2B SaaS and the pros and cons of each of them. With so many models to choose from, it's important to remember that they're not mutually exclusive, or put another way, you're not limited to just using one. Are we familiar with Basecamp here? It's project management software from 37 Signals, been around for ages, great software. The team at 37 Signals has a per-seat pricing model for Basecamp, and it's intentionally simple. There's just one thing to buy, Basecamp, and there's just one thing that impacts how much you pay for it, and that's the number of people at your company that use the product. Per-seat pricing is extremely common in B2B SaaS, and for good reason. It's easy to understand, it's predictable, and it's completely within a customer's control. And these are all things that customers love when it comes to buying software. Now, while those things are great for customers, for the business it does mean that your expansion opportunities are limited to the size of the customer that you sell to. The only way for you to grow is if they grow, so it's really one-dimensional. And your only path to revenue growth other than that is to bring more customers in the front door, which is an expensive exercise. That's why combining models, in this case per-seat pricing with tier-based pricing, is really common. Take Atlas, Atlassian's newest product, for example. Like pretty much all of Atlassian's products, Atlas's pricing is really simple too. You pick the plan that best suits your needs, and that's the tier, and then you pay for the number of people in your company that need to use the product, and that's the seats. With this approach, not only do you monetize as your product is adopted by more people in the company, you also monetize as those people and those users have more needs. And so this creates a second dimension of expansion as opposed to just one. Lastly, it's not uncommon to combine more than two models together. In this case, per seat, tier-based, and usage-based pricing, and this is what Intercom currently do. So for each of their solutions, all built on the same common platform, that is Intercom, in addition to the number of seats that you buy and the tier that you need to buy based on your needs, you also pay for how much you use certain parts of the product. So the more messages you need to send to customers using their outbound capabilities, the more you end up paying. So this provides a third dimension of expansion for Intercom. So even if the company doesn't grow, and even if the teams that are using its needs don't change, you end up paying more as you use the product more. Now, while combining multiple models can be great for a business, it does come with some trade-offs, right? It is added complexity for customers, which can cause confusion and result in them buying the wrong thing and potentially churning soon, or worse, not buying anything at all. So remember when I said there are trade-offs in pricing, this is probably the biggest one. That's why it's really important that your pricing and packaging is based on an actual strategy. What is a pricing strategy? This is the question that I had when I was tasked with leading a redesign of Intercom's pricing. And so what I did was what I do when I ever have a medical issue. I consulted Google instead of consulting the doctor. And I came across this excellent article, I forget the slides are over there, from Thomas Tungus at Redpoint. And in it, he outlines 3 strategies that you can employ. Penetration to optimize for market share. Sorry, maximization, which is about optimizing for revenue growth, penetration for market share, and skimming for profit maximization. And so I highly recommend checking out this post if you want to learn more about each of those. So the question begs, what strategy should you choose? And unfortunately, there's not a quick answer to that one, because your pricing strategy needs to be informed by and also supportive of your overarching company, product, and go-to-market strategies. On that note, let's take a deeper look at a pricing project that I led when I was at Intercom. And before we get into it, I'm just going to give you some background context. Back in 2014, Intercom was, and still is, building something that had never been seen before. Put simply, it was an entirely new way to connect with your customers. So instead of every team in your business using a different tool from a different vendor, all disconnected to talk to the same customer base, you could just use Intercom. So whether that was acquiring leads on your website, engaging users in your product, or providing them with excellent support, you just had one tool, and that tool was Intercom. Naturally, this meant that Intercom had different competitors in different established market categories. So whether that was OLARC for live chat, whether that was MailChimp for marketing automation, or Zendesk in the help desk market. I find this slide funny because every company has desk in their name. Not anymore. When you have these established markets and incumbents in each of them, customers have these established mental models of how pricing should work and how much they should be paying for your product. In this case, tier-based pricing was common across the board, but in each respective market, pricing was a little bit different. In the help desk market, customers expected to buy based on the number of agents. In the marketing automation market, it was the number of contacts in your database. And in the live chat market, it was a bit of a mix, but quite common was just to have a flat rate per tier. And so this made pricing something that was completely different and not seen before and new really difficult, because it's really hard to change established mental models. So you probably all got your coffee for free this morning at the event, but I bought a coffee this morning, so my question doesn't make sense. But when you do buy a coffee, you're typically expecting to pay, $4 to $5 for your flat white with oat milk or almond milk or whatever milk you get these days. But what if you suddenly had to pay based on the number of people that were in the line? Or you had to pay more because it was peak hour, right? You wouldn't have a bar of it. And that's because we've come to expect to pay more as inflation increases, and we have to pay more, a little bit more every year, especially now. But what hasn't changed is how we actually pay. And it's really hard to change that. Yet at Intercom, we changed our pricing a lot. These are just a few of the different pricing models and the different ways of presenting pricing that we had over the years, as we were continually iterating and trying to find pricing that worked not just for what we were building and for us as a business, but also for our customer base. Now, some things worked, some things didn't. Things that did work to start didn't work forever. And that's because a lot changed over the years that affected how we had to price and package the product. First of all is, as we expanded the breadth and the depth of what Intercom could do, we had to evolve pricing and packaging to do two things. The first was, being a business, we had to capture that willingness to pay for the new jobs that Intercom could be used for. And second, we had to align with the mental models of how customers were already buying competing solutions in those existing markets. Secondly, the market just became intensely competitive. At one point, literally every other month, there was a new Intercom killer on Product Hunt, and many of those were attacking us based on pricing and packaging. At the same time, the desire to use a business messenger to acquire, engage, and support your customers across the lifecycle wasn't just for early adopters and startups. It was something that businesses of all shapes and sizes had desired and real demand for. And then this made it really hard for us internally to figure out who to focus on building for and selling to. This explosion in demand saw incumbents in those established categories start to react and create their own versions of Intercom to protect their own future growth. So suddenly, we weren't just getting attacked at the bottom of the market, we were getting attacked at the top of the market too. And then throughout all this, Intercom's own customer base evolved, right? As the product evolved and the market evolved, and no longer did we just have to focus on selling to and expanding and retaining smaller customers. We were starting to acquire some really, really large customers too, who have completely different sets of needs. So after years of really, really great customer and revenue growth, pricing and packaging became a top priority for the company. And that was because we discovered a couple of problems in the business that if we didn't get on and start to think about fixing now, would become much bigger problems for us in the future. The first was that one of the most important metrics for any SaaS companies had started to decline for some key customer cohorts. And the second was that new trials had started to soften while growth or traffic to our marketing site rather was growing. And so question begs, why? We did a lot of exhaustive and really great research by a fantastic team of people at Intercom to really uncover what the root causes of these two problems were. And we identified a number of things. The first and the biggest one, I touched on this before, was customer confusion. As the product evolved and pricing and packaging with it, some customers found it really hard to understand what they needed to buy based on the problem they were trying to solve for Intercom. As a recent first home owner, I liken it to going to Bunnings when I needed to regrout my shower, right? I knew what I needed to get done, but I had no idea what I actually needed to buy, and it was just overwhelmed by choice, and I picked the wrong bloody color of grout too. In addition to confusion, we also saw dissonance from new and existing customers towards the primary method that we were using to price Intercom's outbound messaging capabilities. It was a pretty common tactic and method to use in the market at the time, but it became increasingly uncommon. And on top of that, it was also pretty hard to understand, hard to predict, and not really within a customer's control. So none of the things that I shared earlier, customers really like when it comes to pricing. The other thing was that there was some inefficiency in our pricing model. Packaging in particular wasn't really taking advantage of the broader and deeper usage of our product. And what I mean by that is you could have a customer using Intercom for one use case that would, in theory, be paying exactly the same amount as a much bigger customer using Intercom for 3 different use cases. And so we had a problem to fix there. And last, as I shared earlier, we had witnessed over the years that competition was just hitting us at both ends of the market. And so what did we do about all this? We formed a cross-functional Tiger team to better understand and ultimately fix things. And so at the time, I was VP of Commercial Product Strategy there, so I led the team, and we had leaders from product marketing, sales, finance, and program management that were part of that core team, and then a much bigger extended team that worked on this. And over the course of many months, we redesigned pricing and packaging from the ground up. So I'm going to walk you through how. Now, this was a very, very complex project that lasted a long time, and there were tens of millions of dollars at stake if we messed up. And so this is a very, very oversimplified view of the steps that we took, but these are the key milestones and steps along the way. The first and most critical was to align on an actual strategy for pricing and packaging, which is something that in the past we hadn't really taken the time to articulate. And this was it. It's really simple. It was a 4-page text document that was all about guiding decisions and aligning a core group of stakeholders, of which there were many. Because when it comes to pricing, everyone has an opinion. And that's because it's so critical to your business, so they should have an opinion. So put simply, this strategy document was all about answering 4 questions. The first is our goal. What were we optimizing for? Were we optimizing for customer growth, revenue growth, or both? You have to pick a lane. The second was scope. We were really intentional about being clear on which customers and segments we were designing pricing and packaging for and which ones we weren't. Because when you try to be all things to all people all at once, it usually doesn't work out well. And so we were very disciplined about saying no to certain customers that we were simply not going to try and cater to. Third was the approach. Which of those pricing strategies or some other pricing strategy were we going to employ, and how were we going to apply them? And this, of course, is informed by your goal and your scope. And last but not least, we had a set of guiding principles. We took the time to articulate these and align the core team on them because we wanted to make sure that decisions that needed to be made throughout the project were going to be easier, faster, and a whole lot less painful given the sheer amount of people who needed to sign off. So this is an example of one of the guiding principles that we had at the time. And we were okay about having simpler pricing for customers who had really basic needs, but more complex pricing for customers who had more sophisticated needs, which were usually your larger customers. Once we aligned on that strategy, the next thing we did was we conducted some qualitative and quantitative research to better understand the root causes and ultimately 3 core questions we had. To inform packaging, we wanted to understand what groups of capabilities customers were coming to Intercom for and expected to be able to buy together. We also wanted to better understand their needs. So of those capabilities, which ones were really high value, which ones were more nice to have, and which were just table stakes. And last, the purchasing decision. So who was involved? How long did it take? How did they expect to pay? And how much did they expect to pay? So with a bunch of these insights gleaned through research, we developed what we called buyer personas. Now, I'm representing the work of some amazing people at Intercom here. This is not all my work. Jonathan and Shirley, if you're watching, thank you. This is a deep dive, it's a document that was a deep dive into the 9 distinct buyer personas that we had identified through that research were buying Intercom. Each of these personas had a set of characteristics which helped us better understand, not just in marketing, but in sales and in product, who they were, their pain points, what they needed, and what they valued. And so, for example, this is self-service Sergey, who, quote, was looking for a chatbot platform that makes chats feel like a conversation. With an in-depth understanding of who was buying Intercom and what they each needed, we then picked a select group of them. We didn't try and design and cater to all of them. We picked about 3 or 4, I think. And then based on our company go-to-market and product strategy, we then started to develop pricing and packaging based on that. So these are some really low fidelity concepts of some of the things that we explored, not the final product. And with each concept, we conducted user testing to see if those target buyer personas that we'd identified were actually able to pick the right package that we'd intentionally designed for them based on our understanding of their needs, as well as whether they understood and comprehended and accepted the pricing methods that we were planning to use and employ. Once we aligned on that final approach to both packaging and pricing, again, 2 sides of the same coin, we then built, shipped, and measured to understand the impact. And we did that with a very carefully considered test plan, because we didn't want to just roll out everything to all of our customers, because it would put a lot of revenue at risk. And so it was really important that we understood, were these changes that we planned to make across our entire customer base now and in the future, were they actually going to achieve the things that we set out to achieve based on the strategy? And then throughout the whole project, on an as-needed basis, we held a bi-weekly meeting with our designated steering committee, which included the CEO, the COO, and leaders in marketing, sales, finance, and product. So basically all the big wigs. And these meetings were really valuable because they were intentionally focused on helping unblock progress and help us make key decisions on questions that we had. Like, should we have overages or ceilings for our pricing? What pricing method should we employ for those outbound capabilities that we knew we needed to change? So that's a really quick look at a very oversimplified set of the steps that we took. And I can't share the results of the project, but what I can share is my advice based on what I learned should your company ever need to embark on a similar project. The number 1 learning is to start with a strategy. You don't get it right the first time, but in absence of a strategy, you're more likely to just make a bunch of different changes that all added up, don't make sense together, and create really big problems for you to fix in the future. Second is talk to your customers, obviously. Your newer customers, your existing customers, understand their goals, their needs, and their expectations when it comes to buying software for the problem you're trying to solve for them. Ship to learn. Don't wait until the end of the project to ship what you've built. Sequence changes when you can strategically. It's not always possible, but when you can, do that. And run experiments to get a signal of whether the changes that you're making are actually doing what you want them to do based on the financial model that you've built throughout. And when you do make a change, document it. It was so painful at the start of the project because we had to spend a ton of time looking back, 5 years or so of changes over the years and figure out what change we made when, why did we make it, what impact did it have. And so big lesson learned was, while it's tedious, document everything because it pays off in the long term. And finally, be clear on R&R, not rest and relaxation, although that's important too, roles and responsibilities. When it comes to pricing, every person has an opinion, but you shouldn't act on all of them. So use a decision-making framework like DAISY, so it's really clear to everyone who the driver is, who the approver is, who the contributors are, and who should just be informed. You definitely don't want too many cooks in the kitchen when it comes to pricing. And finally, I'm sorry to say it, but you'll never be done with pricing. Like every successful relationship in life, you need to evolve pricing as the product and market matures. So I don't know if we have time for questions, but with that, are there any questions?
So I've got one from John, so thank you. That was really interesting. Has anyone never had an opinion on pricing? Thought so. All right, so John's got a question. Is there a billing system, like really tactical, that you'd recommend for flexibility when you want to test, for example, like Zuora?
Oh, that's a great question. I think I wasn't super involved in the actual implementation. We had representative from our engineering team in Dublin at the time who focused on that. I do know that we were in the process of migrating to Zuora, and it was painful. Not because Zuora is not a good product. Billing systems are just inherently hard to deal with. I think what you pick is ultimately going to be based on how mature and how big your company is and how sophisticated your needs are. We did use Zuora at the time. I couldn't tell you. I think at Atlassian, actually, we've built our own billing platform. If you're a startup, there is a company that was started by a former colleague at Loom, actually, which is intentionally designed to help you test and iterate on pricing and packaging. Patrick Gallagher is the founder and one of the founders there. I'll look up the name of it because I'm just not coming to the top of mind, but I'll look up the name of it for you.
Awesome. You mentioned grandfathering in one part, but with Intercom, how did you shift existing customers onto new pricing?
We did different things over the years. I'll share a couple of different examples. So earlier, when we were smaller and there was no sales team or less of a sales team and not as much revenue at risk, we would look at the existing customer base and how different segments were impacted by the changes, because different segments, because we sold multiple things, were impacted in different ways. And we then created a risk profile for how likely they were to churn based on the changes. And based on that risk profile, we would grandfather each segment differently. And so I think, analyze my takeaway would be like, look at the customers that are impacted, break them down into segments, understand how likely they are to churn, especially if it's an increase, and then be generous with grandfathering. Like give them many, many months. Back in the days of Atlassian, when we were primarily on-prem, we gave customers 2 years before they saw a price increase. In SaaS, it's not common to give 2 years. I think I'd say around 6 months is probably a good benchmark, which gives customers enough time to decide whether they want to stick around or whether they want to look for an alternative solution. Other things that we did, like more nuanced, we allowed them to pay what they were paying up until a certain point in time and only pay more if they adopted the new capabilities that we were releasing. Sometimes we used the new capabilities as a carrot to migrate. So if you want more updates in the future, we'll continue to support you, but if you want updates, you got to pony up and pay. My overarching advice would be generous. Like Atlassian, one of Atlassian's values is don't fuck the customer. So don't fuck the customer.
Spicy. All right. So here's a spicy, contentious question. Have you seen pricing being driven by the product team versus product marketing?
Yeah, that's how it was driven. Yeah, that's how it was at Intercom. So when I started at Intercom, there was no product marketing team. I was the first product marketer. And pricing was owned by the growth team, which reported into product. And so I think it's fairly common for growth to either report into product or to marketing. It's different at every company, but it was product. So growth owned pricing for the first 4 years. And then with this project, actually, this was the catalyst to shift it to marketing. And we hired a dedicated product marketer whose job was pricing full time. And he now has a team. I mentioned before, his name's Jonathan Brandon. So he has 3 people, I think, and they're focused on pricing. So I think it just depends on what makes sense for your company. I don't think there's a right or a wrong answer there.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's always contentious.
Yeah.
There's some areas that are clear. Everyone wants to own pricing.
Yeah, don't give it to sales.
70% off. When do you switch from customer and revenue growth to optimize for pricing and packaging as a major priority? What's the trigger?
Ooh. Well, I think customer and revenue growth are not mutually exclusive. You want to be growing in both directions, I think. I think my cop-out answer for that would be think about pricing early on, but don't overcomplicate pricing early on because it will hinder adoption of your product. And so you need to, again, it's all about evolution, evolve pricing as you grow when you can, and you're in a position that you've got product market fit and customers are not going to churn just because you increase the price on them or you change pricing up. So I think it's gradual. I don't know whether that answers the question directly, but I don't think it's a matter of just customer growth or just revenue growth. It's usually a blend of both, and one's in favor of the other to a degree. But it should always be something that's top of mind.
Yep. Cool. So while there are still a couple of questions, maybe the last one, could you give some examples of the language that you used when communicating pricing changes?
Oh yeah, this one, it depended on the nature of the change. Like sometimes it was just a pure price increase. Like at Atlassian, the product hadn't really, we were shipping new features. The product hadn't changed all that much, but we were just, what's the right word? We were taking advantage that we were leaving a lot of money on the table. Like when I first started at Atlassian, the most expensive version of Jira was, what was it? It was like $500 a year. Right, $480 a year for Jira Enterprise. When I left, it was $500,000 a year. And so we progressively increased pricing as the market evolved and as the product evolved too. I would say focus on keeping it simple and being direct. Don't try and pull the cover over your customers' eyes because they see straight through it. Just tell them straight up, like, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And how does this change impact you? And whenever I write a pricing email, I always frame it around about those three questions. What is the change and how does it impact you? But yeah, don't try and bullshit people because they see straight through it and then they don't appreciate it and they're more likely to create a negative brand perception.
Excellent. Thanks very much.
No worries. Thanks,
Appreciate it.